I'll be in, but I know certain things because I know my values.
It's interesting that you say this, because I would think it would be of particular value to women in their 30s who are thinking about career versus having children, let's say. That's always a very vexed question for women.
It is. That's one of its utilities. I've definitely seen women at that. In the book, there's 3 stories about women who are at that juncture where they're deciding about career and children, and there's 3 different outcomes. One woman gives it all for her career, one woman sort of cuts her job down to part-time, and another woman gives up work entirely, but it was based on their values.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting, when I was speaking to you before, you said you could never imagine not working, and yet I also sense, having spoken to you now and before a bit, that you cannot imagine yourself having not had your children.
Oh my gosh. I wish
so
right.
You are that middle group that cannot imagine either, so you would have had to factor in both in projecting ahead. Although at that time, of course, when you had your children, you weren't you didn't have this philosophy yet.
Not until they were in about
Although perhaps you did subliminally.
I didn't, I don't think. I mean, I think that I, like many mothers of young children, just lived crisis to crisis, moment to moment. You know, I just had to muddle through every day. It's no way to live in a sustainable way to muddle through. I mean, I used to say all the time, I'm just muddling through. Look, you've got 4 children under the age of 7 and a full-time 60-hour-a-week job. You're doing a lot of muddling through. It's no sustainable way to live. I don't recommend it. And that's why I came to a crisis.
Yeah.
That's why I was standing in that auditorium in Hawaii with my kids in hula skirts. I mean, it's not a way to live.
And yet you wanted the big family.
Yes.
Right? Did you come from a big family?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. I did. I wanted. I wanted my children. I didn't have a great marriage. I'm, you know, not the first woman in the world who doesn't have a great marriage, who fills the hole with children. I feel that, you know, that was my destiny, to have those children. And you know, of course, once they're born, all you can think of is, thank God each one of them came into your life.
Well, I wonder if we could switch gears a minute. I mean, in your book, and I really think it's admirable, you're putting the responsibility on the individual to make these decisions about their life. But sometimes, of course, the society, the culture oppresses you, or it's what's done to you. And I wonder, as a woman who's accomplished a great deal, but I assume has also met with various sorts of prejudice or discrimination or whatever as a woman, and I'm thinking particularly about the Harvard Business Review. I wonder if you felt that you were under certain kinds of pressures as a woman that you wouldn't have been as a man, and that maybe there were things that you couldn't have done about it, that, you know, it was just a matter of being a woman in a situation where you weren't going to be treated the same way.
I didn't have that experience.
You didn't? Okay,
I didn't. You know, I think it was an
that.
extremely enlightened place. I mean, I think that look, you know, when I was made the editor of the Harvard Business Review, I was a divorced woman with 4 young children, and they thought I was the best person for the job. And there was, I mean, it was very enlightened. There was no presumption I couldn't do it. They thought I was a grown-up and I could manage my own time.
And you felt this all the way through your career?
I did. I mean, I think that I have always been really lucky in being in performance-based cultures. So when I was a management consultant, I was at this great, wonderful, terrific company, Bain & Company, and as long as I performed, they didn't care if I was man, woman, or in between. If, you know, they just didn't care. And I performed, and I delivered, and I hit my numbers, and I got along great with the clients, and that's all they cared. I truly believe that's all. I never felt that. And I was lucky.
Do you think it's true in this culture now that it's more or less become, at least in the business world, a very merit-based sort of situation, or do you think there are pockets of oppression?
Of course there's pockets of course there are, but in enlightened companies, they care about performance. I mean, I've just seen it again in enlightened companies. Certainly there are still jerks, Neanderthals, and ding-dongs out there who will look at a person and who their gender matters, and it stinks and it's wrong, and you've just got to get away from those cultures. But in most enlightened companies, especially in this economy, especially in the recession, the great performance trumps all.
And I wonder also, and this gets back to something we were talking about a little bit before we went on the air, if women now are being accepted as women more. In fact, it's understood that they can be powerful, empowered people, and be feminine. Because you certainly seem to be that way, and you said you like clothes and you like pretty things, and yet you can make hard decisions and lead. Do you see a sea change having happened in this country? Was it during your work life or before, or what's your feeling?
When
about
I started at Bain, I mean, I wore a bow shirt. I mean, and I wore the uniform.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, now I wear what I want to wear. And I went to a conference recently of powerful women, and we were talking about very important business issues. And as each one of us came out on the stage to talk about important business issues, we said our names and then announced where our shoes were from. And they're huge. And a huge roar went up, and I'm Suzy Welch, and I'm wearing Prada, and and it was and I'm so and so, and I'm wearing Versace, and we all cheered, and we love our shoes, and it is a celebration of our femininity. But every single one of those women at that conference were incredibly powerful, successful corporate women, and I do think that has changed. I mean, when I entered the corporate world in 1988, coming out of Harvard Business School, I don't think I would have gone to a business meeting and chit-chatted about my shoes. And slowly but surely, as more women came in and we became more ourselves,
and more powerful within the structures,
and right, but also
more confident
that we delivered. I'm telling you, these women were at this conference because they were successful. So we're not talking about the bottom 10% of performers coming out and showing off about their shoes. It's like, the shoes on my feet, I earned them, and it's.
Well, it's very interesting. I do think that this is a change that's happened perhaps in the last 10 to 15 years,
yes,
where women feel, I guess because, as you say, they're successful,
right,
and so they can afford to be frivolous.
Yes, I'm sorry, but I don't find fashion frivolous at all.
Well,
but we can be.
No, I don't know that I find it either, but I guess in the way that men, I would
talk
say
about
men talk about sports, and I think that's frivolous. I put it in quotation marks.
But we can show our authentic selves. I mean,
right.
I always say to Jack, when women get together and they say, "Did you see the new such and such a line? Did you see what so and so's doing this season?" I said, Jack, that is like when you bump into your friends and you say, "What about the Red Sox?" It's the same thing. It's our interest.
Speaking about your husband, Jack Welch, he certainly is a very powerful man, and very well known. Has a high profile, great deal of stature. And I wonder how you feel being linked to somebody. I mean, you're also a powerful woman, but he's older and he's certainly in the business world a giant.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Tell me about what it's like to be married to somebody like that. Do you ever find, does it ever irritate you? Does it ever feel that you need more space? Be frank with us.
Okay, let me tell you, it's an interesting question you ask. Let me tell you how I experienced Jack, okay? To me, like to you, or to anyone who's married, Jack is a man. I mean, I'm not married to the Jack Welch.
Okay.
I'm married to my boyfriend.
Okay.
And so I'm being very frank with you. I experience him as this darling, loving man. He's my guy. And so, I went from being a totally private person to being a totally public person in one day. When a story appeared in a story you would not want to have appear in the Wall Street Journal, appeared in the Wall Street Journal, and suddenly I was a public person. And I read stuff about me I couldn't believe. And
it must have been very hard.
It was shocking. It was like a public death, okay? And yet I was loved by him, and I loved him, and he kept telling me, "We'll just get through this." Yeah. And it was, but I never lost touch with the fact that we were just a man and a woman. And that was the great power of our love. Now, I'm not going to say to you, there's nothing about being Mrs. Jack Welch. I mean, there's a big upside and there's a big downside, and then I am now a completely public person. That's a change in your life that you have to grow up and grow into. But I don't.
Well, I love the way you put it, that he's your guy.
Right.
I think that's a wonderful way of putting it. But when you say that you are a public person now, could you elaborate a little bit on that? That's an interesting concept, and I guess there's some wonderful things attached to being a public person, and there must be some awful things attached to it too.
It's 99% good, okay? So there's the stuff you would imagine, like getting a reservation at a restaurant. I mean, okay, so that's a very good thing. I mean, the downside is that everywhere I was in a dentist office with my daughter the other day, and she did something unbelievably annoying, and I was about to slap her hand and say, "Just knock that off, would you don't please?" She was like, pinches my arm in this very annoying way.
My daughter does that too.
Okay, so she was doing
pinches my arm.
But I knew that everybody in the waiting room, there was a high chance that they knew who I was, and that if I acted like a normal mother in a normal setting, that it would people would go home and say, I saw Suzy Welch, smacking her daughter's hand, and her daughter was pinching her arm in a weird way. And I mean, so that's the downside, but I'm not
You can handle that.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah. You are executive in residence at Babson College, and you counsel undergraduates and MBAs, and particularly women.
Yep.
Could you tell us a little bit about what you think are the issues that young women who are going into business are most concerned with? I mean, I can imagine it's the family thing, family business. But are there any particular things that you see as new from your time? Or
the women who come to me and want to talk to me privately, it's about balancing two careers. A lot of them are not yet envisioning having children. Some are, but they want careers. They want big careers, and they are going to marry or be in relationships with men who also do, and they are talking about the trade-offs. He got a great job in North Carolina. I got a great job in Texas.
Yeah.
How do we talk about it? How do we figure that out? Whose career? Do we take turns with whose career moves forward?
Do you find that women are more willing generally to give in or to compromise than men?
Not necessarily. What I find is in relationships, it's the money trumps it. And so the person who's going to be bringing in the bigger paycheck is the one whose career takes precedence. That's typically what I've seen.
But it's just whoever it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, there have been these articles about women nowadays who are saying, well, I'm not sure I want the career.
Yeah.
But I take it these are not the women that you're dealing with.
Well, these are women who are self-selected because they're
self-selected
in business school. Yeah.
So you don't see a gender difference really in terms of ambition.
Not at this particular institution. I mean, this is a business school, and so in being there, they are, and Babson has a strong entrepreneurial bent, and so these are women who not only are interested in business, but in starting their own businesses, and they're pretty driven.
Okay. Now, we're running out of time, so I want to ask you one more question about the financial situation right now. It seems to me we're in an interesting point where there are advantages for women who want to balance work and family, and there are disadvantages. I mean, on the one hand, it's harder perhaps to think about spending a lot of money on child care and so forth. On the other hand, flex scheduling, job sharing, I have a feeling there'll be more of that. What's your thought about, in this particular climate, what you think is facing us with this balance of family and career?
At first blush, you would get the saying, oh, this might be pretty good for women who want to sort of cut back and spend more time with their family. The problem is, when you dig a little deeper, is that in times like this, companies care more than ever about results. They're operating that close to the margin. So every bit less that you give to work brands you every bit more as a person who's not 100% committed. And I think as you move into flex time as a woman, thinking, oh, there's all this upsides for my family, you are setting yourself up to be the next person laid off. Because as you enjoy that flex time and willingly take it, and they're looking for the next round of layoffs, your lack of availability and commitment to job first is going to have consequences. So I'd say be careful as you enjoy that. Right now, more than ever, there is no margin for anybody being in the organization that is not fully committed.
So the point is to be indispensable.
Yes, always.
Well, I want to thank you for a really enlightening interview, Suzy Welch.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today at the Drexel interview.